Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is James Quintero. I represent the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of SB 2395. In 2019, this very committee passed HB 440, which in part restricted the use of unspent bond proceeds. And this bill, which later became law, required all political subdivisions except school districts to hold a new election to use old bond monies for purposes that were not originally authorized. For ISDs, the constraints were set a bit looser and school boards were afforded some discretion in spending leftover bond money. Now, at the time, I expressed concerns over this arrangement because I thought ISDs might be tempted to use authorized but unissued bond monies in costly and controversial ways. And unfortunately, I lost on that point. But I think the landscape today perhaps proves me correct. All over Texas, school boards today are committing leftover bond money to public projects that are either unnecessary or unwelcome. As evidence, I provided you with 3 articles, all from the 2020 period onward, so after the institution of that law. As you'll see, the first involves Northeast ISD, who in 2020 utilized $2 million from a 2015 bond to purchase property intended to house a 700, and this is a quote, a 700-seat competition arena with a stage where robots can fight each other. The second instance involves Bryan ISD, who last month poached $700,000 in unspent bond monies approved in 2014 and 2019 so as to replace artificial turf. And a third instance involves Frisco ISD, who after voters rejected 3 bond propositions and a Vader in November 2024, just announced in February that it would quote unquote repurpose bond funds from the district's 2018 bond program. And this is, of course, to achieve what voters had just rejected. So unfortunately for taxpayers, examples like these are more common than not. My hope is that these inspire the body today to pass SB 2395 and close that loophole that permits this sort of spend thriftiness. I want to thank you for your time.
Members, other questions? Representative Schoolcraft.
Mr. Quintero, I thought we didn't have any witnesses, so I would have held my discussion till after you. Okay, that's interesting information. Now, those were new projects. What about repairs from, like we talked about, HVAC or roofs or something that's not a new project? What are your thoughts on that?
So as a grouchy fiscal conservative that I am, what I would argue is that school districts ought to be utilizing that maintenance and operations tax rate to set aside monies that would then go to HVAC repair or roof repair or whatnot. We have a maintenance and operations tax rate for a reason. I don't believe it's appropriate to use bond monies in that fashion.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I had a question.
Representative Hayes.
Tell me again, I think you said it was House Bill 440?
Yes, sir, and that was in the 2019 legislative session.
Okay, and educate me more, if you could.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Quintero, on what that bill did exactly.
There were several different components to it, but at the time, it was one of the larger components was to impose restrictions on all political subdivisions as it relates to unspent bond monies, and there were 2 categories created. One, basically everyone except schools, and then in a separate bucket, school districts. So if you're in that first category, then you have to effectively go to the voters with a new election to use old bond monies. For school districts, the school board was afforded some discretion in that they could vote in a public hearing at 2 consecutive hearings to move forward with utilizing old bond proceeds in ways that were not originally contemplated.
Okay, all right. I see that. And then these 3 articles are very helpful. So in the first one here in San Antonio,
Yes, sir.
that you said that was 2.2 million. And then in Bryan ISD, 700,000. And then Frisco ISD, am I reading this correctly? It was like 126 million.
So that first paragraph is the most pertinent. I apologize. I was fighting with the printer this morning, which is why I was a little late to signing up, Mr. Chairman. But the first paragraph there communicates, I think, the broader point, which is that voters rejected all of the bonds and Vader, and yet the district is finding a way around the will of the voters by utilizing old bond proceeds to move forward with what it thinks is necessary.
And how is it that they're having these unused bond proceeds? Are they overestimating the initial cost?
So it's very common for school boards to build in approximately 20% overage into a bond, knowing that, and there's reasons for that: inflation, construction cost, deviations, different factors that they didn't account for. And so it is sometimes the case that a project will come in at cost, leaving a fair amount of money sitting off to the side that the district can later utilize in whatever discretionary fashion it chooses, so long as it comports with the broadly constructed language of the original proposition, which I think is, that's not done in a straightforward manner, in my opinion.
So the current law says if you've got excess monies for school districts, then you have to hold a couple of public hearings that are solely for the purposes of looking at repurposing those funds. And your thought is that we need to go a notch higher and just say you can't even do that. You need to just direct it towards repayment of the debt. And let's say you had this excess money and you didn't need it because you overestimated it. What happens to that money?
It goes back to the taxpayers. So it remains unissued, and we avoid any sort of additional burden that might encumber upon the taxpayer. But yes, I do believe it would be prudent for this committee and this larger body to establish one uniform standard as it applies to unspent bond proceeds, because, if you want to go into debt, okay, but go and ask voters and get their permission first.
Okay. And if we went back maybe, let's say, 50, 60 years, do you know what percentage of school funding was provided by the state versus the percentage that we're providing today?
It's a great question, sir. Unfortunately, I don't know that, but I'm happy to look into that.
Okay, it was just, my impression was we did more longer, and then it kind of went down, and now we're going back up since we're trying to buy down the ad valorem tax rate. But I didn't know the specifics on that. Thank you.
Could you address the issue that Representative Schoolcraft brought up as far as bonds cannot be used for operating expenses, correct? Under the INS tax rate, that would be almost going way above, across the line as far as what school districts are allowed to do.
So it depends on your definition of operating expense. So I believe on the surface level, absolutely. But if we get into the weeds and we start considering whether or not a leaky roof or a broken AC unit or some of those other day-to-day expenses that might accrue over time, I would, in my opinion, I would classify those under the M&O rate as opposed to the INS. But I know school districts have sought to broaden the scope and the usage of bonds over time. And, some of that's evident with respect to technology and the purchase of buses, but also deferred maintenance. So it's a bit of a gray area, and I hope the legislature at some point comes in with a bit of statutory clarity to say, okay, these things are authorized for M&O and these things are authorized for INS, and that's why we have two buckets, and we can't really deviate from that system.
Okay. I know one of the things when I was on the school board in Abilene that I came aboard right after a bond issue had been passed, but the timetable for doing all those projects was about an 8-year time period, because we were having to move one elementary school to one location, and while we renovated that one and remodeled. And as a result, we sold the bonds at the very beginning. And so we had that interest accrued, as you mentioned, over a period of time. And that's where some of the excess funds built up, you might say, and became available. So that would be another question as to whether interest really qualifies under this definition that we're looking at today, in terms of, is that really excess? Is that unspent funds based on just the fact that the projects came in under budget, or is that basically just kind of a windfall as a result of being prudent and investing that money at the very beginning of a project that was going to take years to complete? So
Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
Yeah,
Representative Holt?
and another, in the bond, when I was on the board, school board, was just the fact that we changed the scope of the elementary school a little bit. We decided we didn't need certain features, and so we were able to save that money too, and so that ended up with a balance. So it's not just construction costs and things like that, but it's also sometimes the board changes the scope and, how they're wanting to, build that building or, whatever it is. So anyway, just throw that in there.
Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Representative
I had
Bryant?
one. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, Representative Hayes.
In regards to your thought that if we're gonna spend money for purposes other than what we originally had the bond election, that it ought to be put to the voters. Do you see any merit that if you have several $1 million laying around, and it looks like in Frisco, they had a bunch of millions of dollars, instead of using that to pay it back, go with your other suggestion. If you're gonna repurpose funds, that you put it back out for a vote, because the bill is written just says you have two options. Really, pay off the existing bonds, is really what it does. Is there any merit to the bill being amended to put it out for a vote so that you don't have those bond costs that, cost on the front end?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. At the end of the day, so long as we're prioritizing the needs of taxpayers, or at least we're giving thought to how this might affect taxpayers in their current situation, I think that's a friendly amendment that would do some good.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
You're in charge of drafting it, by the way.
Yes, sir.
Members, are there other questions for this witness?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, but Representative Bryant.
You brought us 3 clippings.
Yes, sir.
One is about San Antonio, and they had $2.2 million left over. And they have put it into a engineering project, which includes this, what was highlighted here, this Walmart that's going to have the ability to let their engineering students display their projects by these robots they built, fighting with each other. San Antonio's, I don't know what their budget is, but it's $2 million, not very big percentage of that budget. Bryan ISD is going to take $700,000 that was left over. And by the way, leftover money indicates they're doing a pretty good job of managing things because they came in below budget. $700,000 on AstroTurf. Well, they got a stadium. They got to have a surface for the stadium, and they determined that natural grass is more expensive than AstroTurf. And it's less than $1 million. It just has the appearance of a solution looking for a problem. I'm not aware of very many school districts around the state. I've never really heard any real horror stories about school districts misbehaving, and their funding is always up in the air. We didn't give them any money last year. Right now, they're not sure what's going to happen. I'm not seeing, I don't see the alarm bells ringing in these anecdotes.
And I think that's fair. That's a fair opinion, sir. For me, it's not about the money. It's about the integrity. Are we being straightforward with voters when we go and ask for permission to go into debt? Are we doing those things and only those things? If we deviate from that path, then I don't think we're being very straightforward, and we need to reconsider the manner in which we are asking for permission, because it needs to be on the up and up.
Okay, thank you.
Members, other questions? Chair recognizes Vice Chair Plesa as being present. Thank you for your testimony. Thanks for being here today.